What is good music? What makes a song good or bad? Is there some set of attributes or criteria that can consistently produce enjoyable music? I feel like as a music writer and as someone who prides myself on the ability to take in and analyze music quickly and thoroughly, I should be fairly capable of answering those questions, and for a lot of music I absolutely can, but every once in a while, a band will just come around and throw a wrench in that, leaving me at a complete loss for how to proceed. Enter Ween, the New Hope duo who have completely shook my taste in music to its foundation over the course of the past few months, and entered the canon of bands I've made my obsession. I've listened to demos, every live album, bootlegs, and so much more in an attempt to just wrap my head around why they appeal to me so intensely. In the process, I think I've come to an even more terrifying conclusion. Ween is my favorite band. Consisting of just two main members, Dean and Jean Ween, the musical content of Ween is nearly indescribable because of the sheer volume and variety that is out there at this point. Seemingly just virtuosos of every single style they touch, Ween tries a new genre on every single song and basically just makes the best song in that genre on their first try, with little exception. From polka to crust punk to overdramatic alt-rock to every style of country under the sun, the duo never fails to display both pure and honest musical talent, as well as an abundance of humor. Forever the industry's biggest goofballs, self-aware comedy is the biggest through line across the entire discography, and it's honestly quite a feat the balancing act they're able to pull off. None of their music could or should ever be classified as comedy music or as a joke. Nothing ever veers anywhere close to like Tenacious D or Flight of the Conchords levels, but it's also never so self-serious that it comes off as cheesy or just stupid. The magic of Ween is that the music is just good. Whether or not you find them to be gimmicky, you have to admit that if you take any one of their songs at face value, it's kind of just all good music. And so I bring you my guide to their material, the spoils of my dozens, maybe hundreds of hours spent trying to discern what makes the band click for me, and my deep dive into their wealth of material. Now, please note that for as big of a Ween fan as I consider myself to be, there are thousands more dedicated and more obsessive than I who have cataloged far, far more of the band's material than I have any remote interest in doing. I'm going to touch on some of the obscure stuff I've listened to, but don't expect a thorough look at all their bootlegs and all of that. I also don't know everything about the band's entire history the way some of you superfans might, so obviously don't crucify me if I get some timelines wrong or miss stuff. This is a beginner's guide, not a superfan's encyclopedia. With that said, I think it's time for us to dive into the wacky, weird, occasionally offensive, and always exciting world of Ween. Let's begin.
I'll be your Johnny on the spot. My dad died, left me all he's got. I'll be your Johnny on the spot.
If you watched SpongeBob as a kid, or have even just been around meme culture at all in the past decade, you've already heard Ween. I don't need to tell you that Ocean Man slaps and is a highlight in the SpongeBob movie soundtrack, but did you know that this album, The Mollusk, is one of the original inspirations for the show? It's not hard to see the connection. The Mollusk is a concept album about the ocean, they both have a great sense of humor, and more specifically, they both have a dynamic of immature shine masking the more mature underbelly of emotional darkness and vulnerability. In a lot of ways, The Mollusk and a bulk of Ween's material can be described as kids' songs for grown-ups, which is a fairly regular description for SpongeBob, the kids' show for adults. With all that preamble, I present The Mollusk as an obvious starting point with Ween. It's the whole package, with all of their weirdness intact, but with a greater concept that will make it more digestible to newcomers. The psychedelic instrumentation throughout makes the record feel more cohesive than the impression you may get from the genres, be it sea shanties, yacht rock, surf punk, you name it. If a genre can really be associated with the ocean, it's probably on here. The songs get bizarre, but never so much so that a fresh-eared listener will be pushed away, and the lyrics and much of the vocal delivery makes it much more typically inviting than a bulk of their material. While a lyrical concept and storytelling may not cover the entire project, the individual songs tell their own little stories in such a way that they all still feel very coherent and conceptual. Take the title track, where two characters are discussing the mythical nature of the titular mollusk that the young boy has found. Mutilated Lips tells its story very differently, but just as vividly, describing what seems to be an LSD trip in elaborate detail, with rhyming that feels random at first, but weaves its own twisted narrative through thoughtful switch-ups and warped delivery. One thing I love, and that I think will be immediately apparent to any listener, is the instrumentals, and particularly the fact that every single one has a very notable moment. Be it a solo or an interlude, the duo always gives a second for their musical ideas to truly shine, be it the weird synth strings in the middle of Cold Blows the Wind, the fuzz solo on Ocean Man, or the beautiful clean guitar solo on Mutilated Lips with those swelling crash cymbals and the very light synths. The biggest highlight for me, though, is Buckingham Green. Honestly, any album that can pull this off and follow it up with a song like Ocean Man is an instant classic, because this is genuinely one of the most moving and epic songs ever recorded, with layered and diverse instrumentation building up to one of the most dramatic climaxes in the band's entire catalog. The vocal delivery is breathtaking, and the instrumentation gives me goosebumps all the way through. This is Ween's best-known release for good reason, and I can't think of a more apt introduction to the group's brand of weirdo rock than this. Notable tracks include Mutilated Lips, Waving My Dick in the Wind, and Buckingham Green. Another album you might have heard a track from in another piece of media. This time we have the opening track from Quebec, It's Gonna Be a Long Night, in Tony Hawk's Underground 2. A whole video could and probably will be done about Tony Hawk soundtracks, but for right now, let's stay on focus. Quebec has always been my favorite Ween album. I considered it essentially flawless on first listen, and since then that love has only grown more intense, to the point where I think if I were to make a top albums list now, it would likely make it into the top 10 or 15. In a lot of ways, it's kind of the definition of a 10 for me, where every single song is perfect in my eyes, and every single song contributes equally to the overall vision of the project. I want to make a note real quick of the fact that this is not only the best Ween album, it is also an album that they released almost 20 years into their time as a band, and even more horrifyingly, almost 20 years ago. But how often do you see that, where a band with classic albums under their belt already somehow pulls through and blows all of that out of the water with multiple decades into their career? It's a testament to the innovation of the duo that they managed to pull off a project that stands far above the rest in terms of quality, and also sounds so distinct from the rest. You might be thinking, well, if all of their songs sound totally different, how can any one album sound distinctly different from another in a meaningful way? To which I would say that this is one of the most underrated aspects of Ween as a band, their taste in curation. See, it's one thing to make a wide variety of songs in random genres, no matter how good they are. It's a wholly separate thing to be able to pick which of those seemingly disparate sounds will come together under an umbrella to present a novel idea together that keeps the listener engaged and makes your new project worth listening to in full, rather than piecemeal with whatever individual songs you like most. And so with Quebec, the styles are just as varied and incongruous as ever, but there's an overall sense of maturity that, while never sacrificing humor, makes for a heavier, more involved listening experience. Substance abuse is a big through line here, and while drugs have definitely been a fairly core ingredient in the Ween recipe, It was clear that that was starting to cause some stress for Gene, so much so that he eventually left the band because of it, though he would eventually return to tour. You can really see it in the lyrical themes here, with Zoloft right from the get-go, and then Transdermal Celebration, maybe their best song, about a bad drug trip, with transdermal meaning a drug taken through a skin patch. The whole album from there remains easily their most matured and adult album to date, with emotional highs and lows that genuinely move me to my core, and a sonic and instrumental palette that draws from more contemporary styles of rock from the 90s and earlier, be it the desert folk vibes of Among His Tribe or the almost Beatles-esque balladry of
I Don't Want It,
culminates in an absolutely spine-chilling guitar solo section, or the near ambience of Captain and Alkan Road. Even the more cutesy or weirdo tracks like Hey There Fancy Pants and Fancy Colored Marbles have a dark undertone, especially the latter with its harsh feedback, breakdowns, and its super duper low vocals. All of it culminates in the closer, If You Could Save Yourself, You'd Save Us All, which is very possibly my favorite album closer of all time. Quebec stands tall as the greatest and also maybe most essential Ween record out there. It's not their weirdest per se, but it's far from a normal and accessible album. It's the only one I have on vinyl, and it's the record that sold me on the band to begin with. I hope it'll do the same for you. Notable tracks are Transdermal Celebration, Tried and True, and Happy Colored Marbles.
Mister, would you please hold my pony? He's over there behind the tree.
Chocolate and Cheese marks the beginning of what I consider to be the main arc of Ween, which they would follow through pretty consistently for the remainder of their career. That being sounding like a compilation CD of a bunch of super different, talented bands. I know I said each album was held together by a theme, and I stand by that, but in the case of Chocolate and Cheese, the variety and seeming randomness is the theme. For as bizarre as the Brown trilogy, which we'll talk about later, was, they each had a very distinct aesthetic across their track lists. With this album, the strangeness was no longer from aesthetic impenetrability, instead opting for practically pristine production, but unpredictable variety from song to song. Before we get to that, though, let's take a look at this album cover. There's a couple things you're probably noticing right now, but let's ignore those for a second and look right about here. For most people, this symbol is what comes to mind when you say Ween. This is the Boognish, who, according to Ween lore, is a demon god who appeared to Diener and Jeaner in 1984 when the two were 14 years old. The two were not friends at the time, but were told what they had to do and immediately went home to record 1,000 songs as Ween.
Ween plays gospel music. Ween is here to spread the word of their lord, the demon god, Boognish.
Other Ween lore moments include the time that Boognish appeared to punish Jeaner for trying to leave the band before the first album had even been released, as well as the time that, quote,
Ween ate dinner with Harrison Ford once, and he thought they were dicks.
Back to Chocolate and Cheese, though. The musical variety is the absolute highlight, like I said, ranging from soulful weeping guitars on A Tear for Eddie to the demented and kind of terrifying but equally humorous and beautiful Spinal Meningitis, whose lyrics are mostly just a boy asking his mom if he's gonna die, to the funk jam of Voodoo Lady, and, of course, the massive Mexican murder ballad of Buenas Tardes, Amigo. Beyond that, there's the ridiculously goofy Carnival-esque HIV song, and, of course, the absolutely beautiful psychedelic rock ballad in What Diener Was Talking About, which is hands down one of the band's best songs with that shimmering acoustic guitar and the woozy solo in the back half. And just one of the best choruses the band ever wrote, too. A key record in understanding Ween, Chocolate and Cheese stands as one of the classics of the 90s and is still one of my favorite records they ever did. Give it a listen. found an article a while back, which I can't find as a recording voiceover, but I'll throw on screen if I find it later, that described the duo of Ween as the modern-day John Lennon and Paul McCartney. It's a statement that's easy to dismiss at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me, and never more than when I listened to White Pepper. This is unquestionably Ween's most accessible album, and in a way, possibly their most surprising. Going into this expecting anything wacky or vulgar like what the band had done previously, it might be a shock to hear no goofy voices, no disturbing moments that make your skin crawl, and hardly any moments that'll even make you laugh. Instead, Ween stripped it back and created what is very possibly my favorite pop rock record ever. It's not an exaggeration to say I like this more than almost any Beatles album. That's because, in the constant push to be genre chameleons and to improve on every style they attempt, they took on the monumental task of improving on near perfection, of doing a better version of the biggest band in the world, and the Madmen actually pulled it off. Opener Exactly Where I'm At is a banging psychedelic cut with a sweet chorus and a shredding solo. Stay Forever is a soft rock ballad with a nostalgic slide guitar and a very yacht rock aesthetic, and Bananas and Blow takes that aesthetic even further to like downright tropical and calypso territory. Pandyfackler is Steely Dan worship through and through, and it slaps, but the greatest highlight for me is Even If You Don't, which is not only a top 5 Ween song for me, but in its attempt to mirror the Beatles' Eleanor Rigby, I think it may have actually surpassed it. This is genuinely one of my favorite songs ever written, with elegant time signature changes between the verses and chorus, an infectious power pop hook that'll be stuck in your head for years, and a totally awesome guitar solo in the back half to round it all out. Is White Pepper the weirdest or even most representative album of Ween's sound? Not even close. And yet, by trying something totally new, being normal, they prove just why they're some of the best musicians out there today. Important songs include Stay Forever, Flutes of Chi, and Even If You Don't. Now, from Ween's most accessible, we're going to move into easily their least accessible studio records, those being the Brown trilogy. I guess I should explain what brown means first in this context, huh? Basically, if a Ween fan calls something brown, it means it's like kind of bad, but in an intentional way that makes it also kind of good and fun and not that deep. It's kind of like the musical equivalent of So Bad It's Good, but a little bit more particular. You know it when you hear it. The first 3 Ween albums absolutely fit this vibe, as each of them is sloppy, stupid, obnoxious, and concerned only with fun, starting with God Ween Satan, The Oneness. Of all the Brown albums, this first one is definitely my personal favorite. It's nothing against the other records, of course, but there's a certain harshness to the production that I find is intentionally missing from the other two. That duller sound works great for those albums to their own respect, but I think that the more aggressive and in-your-face energy coming off of these tracks is just more my style. It has a very punk ethos to it, bordering on noise rock a lot of the time. It is, like all of the Brown trilogy, definitely too long, but it would be stupid to pretend that it doesn't have some absolute career highlights, and I think it has an overall identity and personality totally unique to it. From the opening noise punk of You Fucked Up, to the freaked out psychedelic pop of Don't Laugh, I Love You, to the beautiful folk of Squelch to the Weasel, to the 9-minute porno funk of LMLYP, which stands for exactly what you think it does. There's a ton of variety here, all under this noisy, experimental aesthetic of teenagers fucking around making stupid music in the 90s. Notable tracks include Fat Lenny, LMLYP, and Birthday Boy. Here's where the brownness really starts to sink in. Gone is the harsher, noisier production that made God, Ween, Satan so iconic to me. In its place, we have something perhaps even more memorable to this era, which is the quicksand-like sinking, sludgy lo-fi sound that feels like these tracks were soaked in and left to decay. I think largely the songs here are better written, be it the fan favorite The Stallion Parts 1 and 2, or the poppier Pork Roll, Egg and Cheese. From right away on Dr. Rock, you can see some great development, but none of that stupid and goofy attitude has waned at all, and with tracks like Pollo Asado and Frank, we might be in even sillier territory than before. This is definitely a fan favorite for good reason, and I do think it's excellent. I'm just personally a bit more inclined towards the first record for its sonics than this one. Excellent highlights still include Dr. Rock, Pork Sketches of Winkle, and both Stallion parts. Is this album even more brown than the Pod? Maybe. It's hard to say because of how grimy the Pod was, but the thing with that album is it was very consistent in its griminess. Pure Guava is actually a lot more traditionally good sounding at times, but a lot of the time it also sounds way worse. It's unpolished, dopey, and honestly kind of lazy in a way that's definitely intentional and kind of respectable. I definitely think this album is at least underrated. Some of these songs are downright ridiculous, even more so than on basically any other record, be it the mildly offensive Reggae Junkie Jew or the barely followable Flies on My Dick. There's a lot of moments on this album that are kind of unintelligible, but if you're able to take those in stride, you're also going to get some of the band's best songs ever, be it the best installment of the Stallion series, the Freako drug song Push the Little Daisies, or the power noise of Morning Glory. If you can sift through the muck, you'll get some of Ween's most interesting material in there. Notable tracks include Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy, Sarah, and Push the Little Daisies.
Like a Japanese cowboy.
Opening this segment, let's get back to something I said earlier. Ween is a band that, no matter what they do, will never fail to surprise you. And so, for one of their most surprising records ever, they did what seemed impossible at the time or since. They made an album that covers exactly one genre: country. No crazy genre hopping, no curse production, just straightforward country tunes. And it's excellent. Despite being by far the duo's most homogeneous record track for track, I find it really cool that you can still see the instinct to explore all over the album. All 10 tracks are definitively country, but they get pretty granular in the types of subgenres and styles that they explore, from the bluesier jamming stuff to the more traditional rockabilly type stuff, from bluegrass to more western style. There's never a dull moment, and I think if you've got a bias against country but love Ween, this will probably be the album to convince you that the genre is much more than it's made out to be in the past couple decades. Notable tracks include Mr. Richard Smoker, Help Me Scrape the Mucus Off My Brain, and Japanese Cowboy.
I don't mean to be so insolent, but you know it 'cause I love you.
Dear God, why didn't we get more volumes of this series? Shinola is kind of a compilation of sorts, but it's completely made up of fresh studio recordings of odds and ends that never made it onto studio works, be it stuff that was on demos, weird releases we'll talk about in a second, or songs that had only ever been played live. They're all given the core studio treatment they deserve here. And God, they deserve it. This is one of the best compilations of B-sides ever, and contains some absolute essential tracks for any Ween fan. Be it the older, grimier stuff like Tastes Good on the Bun or Big Fat Fuck, the more upbeat stuff like Boys Club, or the absolute bangers like Gabrielle. Live staple Monique the Freak is finally here in all its Prince-worshipping glory, and the psychedelic run of tracks with Did You See Me and How High Can You Fly shows the band in their most comfortable element. This is one of my personal favorite Ween releases, and a definite must-hear for any fan of the band. Key tracks include Monique the Freak, Someday, and Big Fat Fuck.
A friend's a friend who knows what being a friend
Ween only ever put out one EP of note, and it was this Friends EP, which came a few months before their final album. And I'm gonna be completely real with you guys, I don't love it. It's got one great song, the closing Slow Down Boy, but good lord, there's some stuff on here which just sucks. I can't claim it isn't at least trying new stuff, the way Ween always does, but man, I just don't think the songs they try work that well. The title track is this glitzy Europop track, which, while well produced, is not fleshed out in a way that I find compelling like other Ween tracks. The absolute worst track here, though, and possibly the worst song across Ween's entire studio career, is King Billy. It's literally just a terrible reggae impression over this garbage MIDI instrumental, and includes a fake accent and some lyrics that there's genuinely no excuse for, considering the boys look like this. It's because of that Slow Down Boy is so surprising, not because I think it's one of their absolute peaks or anything, but because it's just such a flash of greatness compared to the other terrible stuff on here. Not an essential EP by any means, but worth noting if you care that much and want to hear what happens when the boys get a bit too out of their depth. And so here it is, Ween's worst album. At least that's what the fans seem to think. Even some of the most avid Ween fans I know seem to loathe this album. Do I agree with them? Well, I do think it is their weakest studio offering, but I don't think it's a bad album. Not at all. In fact, I kind of love it. There's no soaring highs, and there are a couple of low points for sure, especially the Fruitman and Spirit Walker, as well as the only marginally better recording of Friends. But there's also some really good stuff here, like the opening Fiesta, Learnin' to Love, and the 10-minute jam Woman and Man, which climaxes in a borderline noise rock solo. I think what it comes down to is this record feels a bit more dispassionate than previous works on the whole, and there's a lot more experiments that don't land, which was kind of signaled by the EP, but I still think the heart of Ween is here, and there's a lot of stuff to love. Notable tracks include Learnin' to Love, Woman and Man, and Your Party. Am I gonna get in trouble for showing this album cover? You all know what it is, right? It says it right in the title. We'll see, I guess. So here's the deal. In 1999, 8 years before Radiohead's In Rainbows, Ween released an album for free online. It's kind of a demo, and not available on any kind of streaming service or anything now, but it's still a full album of previously unreleased songs, and honestly, it's pretty underrated. It's super low fidelity even for Ween, and the songs are all over the place in terms of quality, but there's some great stuff on here, the best of which would be fleshed out and re-recorded on Shinola, but here you can see them recorded by a very different Ween. In particular, the 7-minute version of Big Fat Fuck is a lot wilder and more improvisational, and of course there's no way to hear a studio recording of the much in-demand Stallion Part 5, which is one of the best in the series, I think. Overall, a release which is ultimately inessential, but still underrated and is a good piece of Ween history for the fans. Now that we've gone through all the big studio stuff, let's talk about Ween's live stuff. I already knew going into the discography that Ween were known for their excellent concerts, but I decided, as I often do, not to listen to any of their live recordings until I was already familiar with their whole discography. This was absolutely the correct choice, but I don't think anything could have prepared me for just how excellent of a live band Ween truly are, and I haven't even seen them. These 8 officially released live records are genuinely some of the best I've ever heard, and each of them holds a different, important place in the band's history, be it the punkier, weirder early 90s stuff or the massive, sprawling middle career stuff. There's always something special to be found. Live in Toronto, Canada is from the Country Tour and features the Shit Creek Boys on instrumentals as a full band, and not only do we get the best renditions of those songs, but we get some amazing chocolate and cheese tracks like Buenas Tardes and Spinal Meningitis. For old stuff, we've also got their very first live recording, which has some of the brownest Ween material, And then we've got At the Cat's Cradle, which is a full 1992 show released finally in 2008. There's also a recording from '01 in which the band plays God Ween Satan in its entirety live. It's a really great, clean recording of some awesome performances a decade later. Paintin' the Town Brown is a compilation of song performances from all through the 90s, including their early Brown stuff, as well as some big hits from Chocolate and Cheese on the first CD. The terrifying part, though, is the second CD containing the 30-minute jam Vallejo, and also a 26-minute long version of Poop Ship Destroyer, which, if you ever needed to find the final boss of music, this is probably it. Absolutely insane. My favorite era for their live stuff, however, is the early 2000s. There are 3 live albums from that time, and all of them are amongst my favorite live albums ever. First, we have Live at Stubbs, which is almost certainly my favorite. It's more than 2.5 hours long, but not a moment is wasted across all 3 CDs. It's basically just a greatest hits album, and while you could argue there should be more from the Mollusk, what we get instead is just as good in my opinion. The final disc, in true Ween fashion, contains The Long Song, which is a nearly 40-minute rendition of LMLYP, which has gotta be heard to be believed. There's not a single moment here I don't love, it's just magical. From there, we have All Request Live, which was broadcast on the web in 2003 after the band polled on their website for what songs the fans would want to hear. Ween fans being Ween fans, the results were about as weird as you could expect, with deep cuts aplenty, including opening with all 5 parts of the Stallion. Now, an attentive viewer might say, hang on, there's only been parts 1, 2, 3, and 5 so far, and you would be correct. This is the only real official release of The Stallion Part 4, and it's pretty great. The remaining track list is as varied as you'd expect, with Brown deep cuts like Covered in Gas and Set It on Fire, next to their sweetest and best songs like Stay Forever and Tried and True. Another excellent view of the band in their prime. And finally, there's the 2003 Live in Chicago show, which, while it was released on a CD, the real way you should be experiencing it is either through the actual DVD or the rip of it, which is up on YouTube. It's one of the most excellent live DVDs ever released, and while the CD is a fairly good abridged version and perfect in its own right, the full video gives a fuller view of the band in their absolute peak. It's a flawless set list, and the energy from the duo, the backing band, and especially the crowd is only ever done justice by the visual. Just amazing stuff. Okay, so I may have lied when I described the Brown trilogy as the first 3 Ween albums. If you look far enough, you may find yourself face to face with these first 3 tapes that Diener and Jeaner made in the 80s. Do I have anything nice to say about these tapes? Not really. I could respect these from an abstract standpoint of appreciating the fact that these 2 kids were messing around and making whatever weird stuff they wanted, but it is obnoxious and grating in a way that even the Brown trilogy never dared to be. There's a lot of screeching especially, which makes me want to rip my ears out, and I had to pause a fair bit trying to get through these. Proceed with caution, ye who dare enter. With all that said, the last side of Axis Bold as Boognish is actually pretty good, so if you want a look at the potential these 2 had, those last 4 songs are worth giving a look if you feel so inclined. And finally, we've got our last category. This is the stuff that we never put out officially, be it live bootlegs or unofficial demos and recording sessions. I'm not going to go in-depth about these, but I'll shout out a few of my favorites. For demos, there's uploads on YouTube containing demos for almost all of their albums, but 2 of them that I'm partial to are the Mollusk Sessions and the Long Beach Island tape. The former is exactly what you'd expect, containing early versions of the Mollusk tracks, but Most importantly, there's a few unreleased songs here, some of which are beyond fantastic. Kim Schmaltz is easily the highlight of these, which is not only an amazing demo, but possibly a top Ween song, period. The Long Beach Island tape, on the other hand, is a bunch of White Pepper demos, and it's almost as good as the main album. It doesn't sound really that lo-fi, more like alternate recordings than anything, and it's so much more chilled out and relaxed. I feel like I should be listening to it on a hammock by the river while drinking lemonade. Of course, there's also some tracks here that never made it onto the album, my favorites being the nearly ambient slowcore of Wash Me Down and the laid-back Beatles-esque Be My Wife. I can't say enough good about these tapes, they just make me so happy every time I hear them. There's also the Boognish Rising Thanksgiving sampler, which is a fan-assembled collection of demos from the early years, which was officially accepted by the band later. It's a really nice window into those early years, and all the tracks we may never have heard otherwise. Separately from those, though, I have to talk about the absolute best alternate take and outtakes compilation of all time, that being the Caesar demos. These are taken from the Quebec sessions and contain just as many, if not more, outtakes than songs that actually made it on the album. And honestly, I wish we'd just gotten 2 albums because some of the band's best hidden gems are on here, and the last 30 minutes could almost be an album in and of themselves. It's 100 minutes long and an absolute behemoth 2-disc set, but with tracks like She Caught My Fancy and Eulogy for David Anderson, as well as I Fell in Love Today and Ambrosia Parsley sprinkled through, that runtime goes by like it's nothing. If you love Ween by this point, you owe it to yourself to listen to this. It's by far the best set of Ween demos. For live bootlegs, it's honestly hard to go wrong because all their live shows are at least interesting, and most are really good. There's a long list I'll try to remember to put in the description that should give you the rundown of all the demo and bootleg content Ween has all in one place, so if that's your jam, then boy, you've got a lot to go through.
The wheels fell off, the bottom dropped out.
And that's it. Ween video complete. This one was fun and a little grueling to get done. I love this band so much, but there was so much material to listen to that it was exhausting at times, realizing how much there was left to write about. I'm glad to have this done, and I'm excited to go on to a new project. Shout out to my patrons as always. If you want Discord access and early videos, you get those for just $3 a month one time. Nobody gets kicked out if they cancel their sub. With all that said, I'm off to go work on more videos, I think.
If you could save yourself, you'd save us all.